As you're all joining us, just want to introduce myself. I'm Chitra Kalyanderg. I'm Client Success Manager here at TRG Arts. I'm here along with Rebecca, my colleague Rebecca, also a Client Success Manager with us. We're going to be walking you through today's session. Just going to wait and see if we have some folks filtering in. So this is really going to be a how-to session, where we're going to be giving you guidance and tactical execution tips for really how to be using data center to support your organization in ways, in some ways that you may not necessarily be used to doing, but maybe some of you are. So it'll be a good kind of bolstering and refresher for folks. And as we're coming in, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in is that we are recording this session. And so we're going to be sending you a link for this recording after our session. So you can keep an eye out for that. And you do have the chat feature in your Zoom. And so if you have questions throughout, Rebecca's going to be monitoring the chat feature for questions. So feel free. We are going to leave time at the end for questions, one-on-one questions that we can answer in real time. But if you have questions throughout, feel free to drop them and Rebecca's going to be monitoring them. And if we can't get to your questions at the end of the session, we will certainly try and reach out to you and answer those. And then really, again.
Oh, I would also say,
yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
Everyone, don't forget, you can send a chat message privately. So if you have a question, but you might be a little nervous to ask it in front of colleagues, that's okay. You can send me that private message and I'll be keeping tabs there as well. So yes, please, please, please send your questions as we go. This time is for you to be helpful for you. So absolutely use that private chat function if that makes you more comfortable to ask your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca, just double checking, you have facility to let folks in, right, from the waiting room?
I do, yeah. So Chitra, I can keep an eye on that as
great.
Yep.
If you could, that would be great, because I want to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, I'm Chitra with TRG Arts, Client Success Manager. I'm here with Rebecca McNamee, who's my colleague, also Client Success Manager. So we're going to be walking you through our data center in action training right now for the next around 30 minutes. And these are really sessions that are designed to be short and actionable, right? And so we're going to be covering specific topics today, and you'll have questions. But if you have more questions after this, feel free to reach out to myself or Rebecca, or shoot an email to help@trgarts.com. We can always reach back out to you and have one-on-one or even group sessions and trainings to dig into topics that might come up that we don't cover here today. So just letting you know that that's always an option. And all right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. All right, so data center in action is where we are right now. Really, what are these? What are these sessions? They're really chances for you all to get more information on how to become a data center super user. So these data center in actions, which sometimes you may have known them as quick wins, these are recurring webinars and trainings that we are putting together for all of our users to give you a chance to understand a variety of topics and dive deeper into a lot of the practices that you will need to develop your campaigns, and a way to leverage this tool, which is really a robust tool and powerful in many ways. Data center in actions, we hope, will provide you not only with foundational knowledge and training, but these opportunities like today, which allow us to kind of dig in a little bit more and get into some of the more nuanced topics. Like today, which is what we're going to be talking about, donation pipeline, right? So understanding our pipeline of donors. And we're going to be doing that by identifying our donor segments, right? So answering the question of where are our current donors coming from? We're going to be also measuring response rates, right? To get at this question of how effectively are we converting our pipeline into donors. So we're going to see how we can use Data Center to help us do that. And then finally, we're going to be researching and modeling our current donors, groups of our donors, to get a sense of who are they and how might that help us think about how we're talking to them and who we're targeting. So for a lot of you, or for many of your colleagues, because I know a lot of you here today are within development departments, but for a lot of your marketing colleagues, for example, Data Center has been a really great tool when it comes to trading and researching lists for promotional materials, marketing communications. But right now, we're not holding regular live events so much. We see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Things are starting to open up, and I know that there's going to be some performances happening in the summer, and that's really exciting. But for the most part, where we are right now in this now year and a half of the pandemic, for a lot of you, that part of the tool, the list trading and the list building, or the list trading, I would say, has been kind of dormant for a lot of you. But there are many ways that you can still leverage the resources within Data Center to help answer other business questions that go beyond promoting live events. And so some of the questions that we've been getting a lot amongst our clients are around, annual fund development campaigns. And so two of these really important questions are, where are my fiscal year 2021 donors coming from? And knowing that, how will that impact who I mail my next donation appeal to? If right now, if you're in the process of putting together your fiscal year-end campaign, how might I take a look at who gave this year? And how might I know which segments to be targeting and who are the most likely segments where I should be putting my resources towards? So we can dig in here and we can actually use Data Center to help us identify some of the solutions to these questions. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be creatively using our list builder feature within Data Center, and specifically our inclusions and suppressions, to take a look at our fiscal year 21 donors and say, okay, who are the segments that did give to us this year? How large are those segments? How might we understand what that pipeline looks like? Then we're going to be using our list filtering feature to actually see, all right, of those folks who could have given this year, who actually gave, how can we quickly calculate a response rate to see how effective our appeal has been? And then so that can help us think about who to be mailing for our next appeal. And then using our demographic reports to get a sense of a demographic model of who our donors are. So that's what we're going to be covering in this session. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately go into Data Center to go get into the tool and actually talk about how we're going to be doing this. So what I'm going to say at the outset is there are going to be steps in here that in a way are going to be kind of shortcuts that you're going to see. We're not going to use this time to cover any of the foundational elements of creating a list within campaigns and naming them and naming conventions and things like that. If you have questions around that, feel free to ask us. There's also the help section, which is fully searchable within Data Center that you can get that information from. But we're going to be talking a little bit about tactics here, and so we're not going to cover those foundational elements. So for the first thing, we're going to go into our Data Center account, and this is my test account. And so some of this data here is going to look a little different than what you might see because it is a test account. So just keep that in mind. So what we want to do is we want to start doing research, right? And so we're going to go into our campaigns and we're going to create a research campaign. And I really encourage all of you to do this if you aren't already doing this, is to use the features within Data Center to research your lists and research your patrons and donors in this way. You can do that by creating a research list. And so what I've done is I've created this donation pipeline research campaign. And I can have multiple lists within this campaign. And that's something that you can do with all of your campaigns, even if they're marketing campaigns or research campaigns. And so we're going to dive in here I've created one that's FY21 donation response rates. So we're going to go ahead and open that list. And right now this is empty, right? And so what is really the essential question that we're trying to understand? We're trying to first get a sense of who gave in fiscal year 21, who contributed as a donor in fiscal year 21. So what you'll do is you'll go ahead and you will add your segment of fiscal year 21 donors. Now, for the purposes of this example, I've gone ahead and I've created a segment that is actually a segment group that is all of my 2021 donors. Your segments will look different, but you'll probably have a segment that says donor, and then it'll be 2021 all donors. If you're following our naming convention, we always want to add our year. But we want to go ahead and pull in our segment of 2021 donors. Why? Because we want to get a sense, what's our baseline? All right, who actually gave this year or is giving this year, and who gave thus far this year? And so we have our gross count of our patrons, but then we also see here that our net count is 831 patrons. So what I want to do is I want to actually keep track of this number, because when we start to calculate response rates, this is going to play a factor. And as we start to identify segments that did give, we want to use this base, this number as our base. So what I encourage all of you to do is jot this down separately. I've created for myself an Excel spreadsheet. And Rebecca, is this large enough? You can just like nod. Yeah, okay, great. So what I did, I've just quickly created an Excel spreadsheet for myself. I want to keep track of who my 2021 donors are to begin with. I want to jot this down. So what was that? It was 831. All right, so I'm going to put that in here. And so what I've also done here is, you notice I've created some segments that I now want to start pulling out, and I want to be researching against our 2021 donor segment. If we think about who would have been those patrons who likely gave this year, well, we know that folks who gave last year, our renewing donors, are probably the highest likely patrons to have given. And so let's now go back to Data Center and pull in our 2020 donors so that we can get a sense of what was that pool that could have potentially renewed this year. So I'm going to pull in, and again, what I've done is I've created my 2020 all donor segment. I'm going to pull that in. Just going to resort this. And so now what I see is that my deduped figure here of these two together is 688 patrons who gave in 2020, who could have given in 2021. So let's keep track now of this figure. So I'm going to go back to my, and that was 688, right? Yeah. I'm going to go back to my Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to put in 688. Now, what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to unhide, because we're going to start thinking about, all right, response rates. Okay, so this was our potential pipeline, right, of 2020 donors. But who actually contributed? And what I've done here is just quickly done a formula to calculate the response rate of the number responded over the net count. So what we're going to do now is in order to understand who actually gave, I'm going to use my multi-filter feature to understand who gave in 2020 and who also gave in this segment, 2021, who appeared in two segments. I'm going to go up to my multi-filter, add a multi-filter. I want to apply this filter to all segments in that list. So both of those segments. Include patrons, that appear in at least both of those lists. I'm going to save that. And then right away, you notice that of the 688, 160 of them gave in both years. The 160 donors we renewed. So let's put that in there. And we hear right away, we notice it's a 23% response rate. That's actually a little low, right? If we think about renewing our donors. So that's an interesting takeaway right away that we have. All right, so let's now think about our other segments. Who are likely to have been giving? So if we think about, donors, patrons who are likely to be giving to our organization are those who are closest to us. So we had our renewing donors, but then we have donors who could be lapsed. So who probably gave in 2019, 2018, and 2017. Let's take a look at those 3 years, but who did not give in 2020. So let's create a segment group of those 3 years. And what I'll do actually first is I'm going to get rid of this filter. Okay, I'm going to go back to my segments. And I'm going to actually suppress now my 2020 donors. I'm going to put my 2020 donors in my suppression list, because when I pull in my new segment, I want to make sure that I'm not double counting. So we've already counted these folks. Let's pull them into suppression. Let's add our 2017 to 2019 donors. I've actually created this into a large segment group. And so that's a good trick that you can also use when you're building lists. You don't have to pull in individual segments. You can actually create a segment group to make things a little easier for you. So I'm going to pull in my donors. Lapsed donors for the past 3 years is what I'm going to be looking at. You can decide how far back you want to look at. And then here again, same process, same methodology. In this case, 894 is our net count. I'm going to switch over here. I'm going to keep track of that. All right. So that's our pipeline there of lapsed donors of those last 3 years. Who gave out of those? I'm going to apply my multi-filter. And right away, we now see 26. Okay, it's a smaller number, but that's to be expected. These are lapsed donors, right? So it's about a 3% response rate. And actually, in my opinion, that's not so bad. That seems normal for lapsed donors. So the next segment that I'm going to be thinking about, all right, we have our lapsed donors. How about those patrons who actually transacted with us but haven't donated? So let's think about that as a segment, 2017 through 2020. Individuals who might be single ticket buyers, subscribers, flex subscription buyers, but who have no donation history. So before we do that, we're going to, again, get rid of this filter. We want to now suppress this list because we want to make sure that we're not double counting folks who may have appeared in these two lists in our past patron, but no donation segment. I'm going to pull in. And again, I've already created this segment. I'm going to pull in that segment, right? So these are individuals who have transaction history, but not donation. And it's a big number, right? It's a big number because it's pulling from 2017 through 2020. But as a net count, we have 89,953. Now, I'm going to go back. We're going to add our multi-filter. Out of this pool, this large pool, who actually gave? So 626 patrons out of this past patron no donation pool gave this year to our donation campaign. That's a pretty large number. And so the response rate is much lower, but we have a much bigger pool. But if you actually look at the total number of patrons, I would say that's a pretty successful number. Okay, so let's go back and let's get rid of this filter. And let's take a look at our segments. And what we're going to do here is we're going to suppress this. And now what we are left over with is about 20 patrons who probably are either brand new to us or further lapsed. And what we can do here to do a gut check for this is we can actually do some subtracting, right? Because it's really the remainder. And there's a number off here, but it's pretty close. So I think that's pretty good. So this is interesting. We now have about 19 or 20 folks who we're not entirely sure where they're coming from. They're either like way lapsed or they could be brand new. So what the last thing I want to quickly do is ask, who are these folks? I'm curious to know how they compare to all of our fiscal 21 donors as a whole. So what I can do here is actually go to reports, and I can pull a list demographic report. And when I do that, I can either do a list demographic report just on that list, but what I can do is I can compare it to any other list that I would like to compare it to. You can also compare it to your organization as a whole. You could compare it to your community that you might be in. I have this list that is my fiscal 21 donors. So I'm gonna compare it to that. And so what I'll do that, and then I'll say view report. I'm not gonna click it right now, but because I've already have it pulled up. I'm gonna view the report, and it's going to pull up, and I always like to save as an Excel spreadsheet, which is what I'm pulling up. And so you're gonna see your match rates for your research campaign that we're looking at, the response rates, against the list that you're comparing it to. These are pretty good response rates for both of them. It's a small pool. But what you'll see here is just some really interesting demographic attributes that can help you now ask questions and perhaps target some of you can pick out what those attributes are that are meaningful for you. And if you wanted to, you can actually filter that remainder list by those attributes if you would want to target and do some specific mailing. But also this just gives you some interesting information around that could either support or challenge some of the assumptions that you might have around who are your donors. So for example, what's interesting here is, of those of those remaining fiscal 21 donors compared to the full donors, like more of them don't have children present in their house. That's an interesting tidbit. There's actually a large contingent of them that are from the silent generation, but there's a few of them that are, from Generation X and millennials that kind of look similar, but we don't have any Gen Y. So that's interesting. And then looking at income differences here too. Our donors as a whole, a lot of more of them fall in more of the upper income brackets. There's an even distribution here. Those who do have children in that remainder of 20, they tend to fall in these categories. So, and of course you can go to this other report and get further detailed and more granularity. So that is, I'm going to stop sharing. There we quickly, went through inclusions and suppressions. We calculated response rates through that, and we ran a demographic report to kind of model some of our donors. That was a super quick run through, but I want to now stop talking. I want to just open it up. If you have questions and anything, and Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, so a question came in. Maybe could you reshare the table that you
Absolutely.
were into in that Excel workbook? The question is kind of linking back to at the beginning. You talked about, okay, who is donating, and then how do I use this information in my next campaign? Can you speak a little more, Chitra, to if this was your organization, this is the data you see. what does this tell you about who's responding and how you might adjust your next mailing?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rebecca, feel free to jump in here too. I mean, the thing that jumps out to me here with this particular data, and this is test data, so yours was going to look different, but this is kind of a low response rate for renewals. So one question that I'm going to ask for myself is, why aren't my renewals, why aren't why didn't my 2020 donors renew at higher rates than I was expecting? How often am I going out and asking for renewal donations? Do I need to rethink the frequency of touch points to them? Do I need to rethink what's motivating them to give and give again? You know, so there are some questions there around benefits maybe that might come across. I also see this pool is quite interesting. So I did a quick graph here. Past patron, no donations. This is, I think with this data, it's a little exaggerated, but right here, you know, there's something here that says, interesting. We need to kind of dig in here and perhaps think about, right now, this is 2017 to 2020. Could I potentially go further back in my database to my lapsed patrons and mail my next appeal to folks who are from my 2016 segments, 2015? I can do some calculations around my response rates, like how much is the mailing going to cost me, and like how much of an average, you know, donation might I be getting? Is it going to be worth that investment to actually go back a couple years? So there's just some of the things that could affect tactics and strategy. Rebecca, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, and it's just that reminder that, you know, we have just these 4 segments here, but as Chitra was kind of alluding to there, you can, the lapsed donors, you could break out more specifically. So 2.91% included 3 years, remember? So how does that look from year to year? And of course, that segment of 89,000, you could break down a whole lot more to understand more nuance, but this is the basics of how to get started. Because the other thing I would add here is that you can imagine now, you know, we used an example of understanding who donated, but if you're asking who subscribed, who bought tickets to this show, who bought tickets to my virtual, who bought tickets to Harry Potter, who bought tickets to whatever, this same method can apply to anything that you want to understand where patrons came from. There was another question that came in around the demographics, and when we do those demographics reports, it is yes, giving an aggregate of here's what that entire segment, that entire list looks like, versus every individual. But what you can also do in Data Center that we didn't hook into today, but you can absolutely do, is if you want to go in and say, okay, I want everybody who has a child in the house, I want to export those people, you can do that in Data Center. But that specific report that Chitra shared is the aggregate demographics for the people that are in that